When I was 22 years old, I decided to rent the downstairs apartment in my parents' house to save money while still having my own private space. However, even though my parents were often away, I still felt a lack of privacy. The apartment had a separate entrance and was divided from the upper floor by a locked door. One weekend, while my parents were away, I invited two friends, Anthony and Jay, over. We had a few beers, watched a hockey game, and played loud music without worrying about complaints. Since the fridge upstairs was bigger, I kept our drinks there and left the door between the two floors open. After drinking quite a bit, the three of us decided to sleep. The large couch was big enough for both of my friends, while I went to my bedroom. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps upstairs. I assumed it was either Anthony or Jay going to the kitchen for a drink, so I didn't think much of it. But a few minutes later, I heard someone trying to turn my bedroom doorknob. Fortunately, I had a habit of locking my door before sleeping, so they couldn't get in. Thinking that one of my friends might have been drunk and confused, I decided to ignore it and go back to sleep. The next morning, Anthony had already left, and only Jay was still asleep on the couch. When I asked him if he had tried to enter my room, he vaguely said he didn't remember because he was too drunk. I didn't ask Anthony either, assuming it wasn't a big deal. That whole day, I was out and returned home quite late in the evening. I wasn't drunk but was very tired, so after having a quick snack and watching TV, I went to bed. However, as soon as I turned off the TV, I heard footsteps upstairs again. This time, I felt genuinely uneasy, but I tried to reassure myself that it was just the house settling. But then, the sound of my doorknob turning came again, followed by a soft knocking. At that moment, I panicked. I quickly texted my family and friends, but no one responded. Grabbing a hard object for self-defense, I hid in the corner of my closet. After about 10 minutes of silence, I decided to call 911. When the police arrived, I gave them the key to the side door so they could enter the house. We searched the entire downstairs apartment before moving upstairs, but we found nothing. It wasn't until we checked my parents' bedroom on the third floor that the officers discovered a strange man hiding under the bed. He looked filthy and terrifying, possibly homeless. When the police took him away, I felt more relieved than ever. After the incident, I was unsure how he had gotten into the house. Maybe I had forgotten to lock a door the night before, or worse, he had already been inside before we even got home, and we had no idea. I have always loved peace and solitude, so when I found a small cabin deep in the forest, I immediately decided to move there alone. Each day passed peacefully. I woke up to the sound of birds singing, chopped firewood, fished in the nearby stream, and spent the evenings reading books by oil lamp. There was no noise from the city, no car sounds, just the surrounding nature. But that peace didn't last long. One evening in early autumn, while I was sitting reading, I heard a strange sound outside, a branch snapping. I stopped and listened more closely. At first, I thought it might be a deer or wild animal passing by. However, soon after, I heard the sound of rustling leaves, as if someone was slowly walking around the cabin. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it through the window, but outside was only darkness and the trees swaying in the wind. There was nothing unusual. I told myself it was probably just the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me, and I tried to forget about it. But the strange sounds didn't stop. A few nights later, as I was about to sleep, another sound came, a faint scratching on the wall outside. I shivered. That sound wasn't like the wind or animals, it was as if someone was deliberately scratching the wood. I slowly walked over to the window in the guest room, pulled back the curtain, but outside was still just the quiet of the night. A sense of unease crept into me. I locked the door tightly, checked all the windows, then climbed into bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Then one night, I discovered the strangest thing. I was looking for a jacket in the wardrobe when I noticed the wardrobe door slightly ajar, a thing I didn't remember doing. When I opened the door, I saw a small torn piece of cloth lying on the floor, looking old and dirty. I had never seen it before. A chill ran down my spine. How could that piece of cloth be there? Had someone been in my cabin? I shook my head, trying to reassure myself that it was just something I had accidentally left behind and forgotten. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The strange noises continued. The next night, just as I was about to fall asleep, a knock came from the living room window. It wasn't the sound of a branch hitting the glass, but distinct knocks, as if someone was standing outside, deliberately trying to get attention. I sat up, my heart pounding. I held my breath, listening. After a moment of silence, I decided to get up, grab the flashlight, and move toward the window. When I slowly pulled back the curtain, my heart seemed to stop. Outside the window, in the middle of the night, there was a figure standing there. The shape was blurry in the moonlight, but I could clearly see a pair of eyes staring directly at me. My body froze for a few seconds, then survival instincts kicked in. I backed away, grabbed my phone, and called the police. My voice trembled as I gave them my address, my eyes never leaving the window. But when I looked back, the shadow had disappeared. I didn't dare stay in the cabin anymore. I ran to the door, jumped into my truck, locked the doors, and sat there, my heart racing, eyes darting around the darkness. Everything was still, as if nothing had ever happened. 15 minutes later, the police arrived. They checked around the cabin but found no one. There were no traces left behind, no evidence of an intruder. They said it could have been a figment of my imagination from being alone for too long, or perhaps some animal. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. I had seen that figure. I had felt its gaze. I decided never to return to the cabin. The next day, I packed up my things and left for good. Even though I would never know who or what that shadow was, I didn't want to stay and find the answer. The darkness there was no longer peace. It had become a nightmare I never wanted to experience again. I never thought that an ordinary night could turn into a haunting memory that would stay with me for years to come. At the time, I was only 15, living with my parents and our dog Abby in a small house in the suburbs. It was a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other, and I had never felt afraid when I was home alone. But then, that night happened. My parents had an unexpected business trip, and I was home alone with Abby. I had gotten used to this, as my parents occasionally spent the night away, but something about this time felt off. As dusk fell, Abby began to act strangely. She paced around the house, whining softly, then suddenly stood in front of the living room window, barking furiously. I jumped and looked toward where she was barking, but outside was nothing but darkness. No one was there. "Shoo, Abby, there's nothing out there," I tried to calm her, but Abby wouldn't stop. She kept growling, her watchful eyes fixed on the window. A chill ran down my spine. After a few minutes, Abby seemed to calm down a little, and I tried to convince myself that maybe she was just reacting to a stray cat or something harmless. I locked the front door, checked the windows, then went back to the living room and turned on the TV to distract myself. But then, I heard a knock on the door. It wasn't loud, just soft taps, but enough to freeze me in place. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Who would be visiting at this hour? I quietly walked over to the front door and looked through the peephole, but there was no one outside. The sense of unease grew stronger. I turned to go back to the sofa, but suddenly I heard the sound of rattling at the basement door. I froze. The basement door was always locked, and besides, it was located at the back of the house, a place hard to find unless someone was familiar with my home. The rattling continued, as if someone was trying to turn the doorknob. Abby growled, then suddenly rushed down the stairs to the basement, barking like mad. I stood there, my heart pounding, hands clutching my phone. I wasn't sure whether to call the police. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe one of the neighbors had gotten the wrong house. But then, suddenly, Abby went silent. I held my breath. The house was now enveloped in an eerie silence. Abby had never stopped barking so abruptly like that. I wanted to call out to her, but my throat felt tight, and I couldn't make a sound. Slowly, I backed into my bedroom, trembling as I closed the door, then crawled into the closet, clutching a small gun my father kept for emergencies. I sat there, heart pounding in my chest, listening intently for any noise from outside. But everything was still. No footsteps, no sign of Abby. I didn't know how long I sat there, maybe a few minutes, or maybe an hour, until I heard the sound of my parents' car pulling into the driveway. The door opened, and my mother's voice called out, "Sweetie, we're home." I jumped up, ran out of the closet, and into my mother's arms, tears streaming down my face from fear. My dad immediately sensed something was wrong and began checking around the house, but there was no sign of anyone having broken in. The basement door was still locked, and there were no unusual traces. Abby came back to normal, running over to lick my hands, as if nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was all just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something had actually happened. The next morning, something even stranger occurred. Uncle Pete, my dad's younger brother, stopped by. I didn't like him much. There was something unpredictable about him, and although he always tried to be friendly, I always felt uncomfortable around him. He smiled at me and said, "I stopped by last night to drop off a thank you card, but I guess you were asleep." My heart stopped. My dad immediately turned to him, his voice filled with anger. "What the hell were you doing here at midnight? And why were you near the basement?" Uncle Pete seemed flustered and then awkwardly smiled. "Oh, I just thought the basement door might be open, so I tried it." My dad didn't say anything else but stared at him with a look of pure contempt. Then he pointed to the door. "Get out. Don't ever come back." Uncle Pete seemed like he wanted to say something, but then turned and left. After that, my parents cut off contact with him. I never knew what Uncle Pete's real intentions were that night, but whenever I think about the fact that I might not have woken up the next morning, I get chills. And the thing that scares me the most is the sudden silence of Abby that night.